The solicitor slid the iron key across the desk, as if he were feeding a reluctant animal. It was old in a way that made old feel like a compliment. Blackened, heavy, its teeth worn to a cruel, practical elegance. Evelyn Hart let it settle in her palm. It was colder than it should have been. "Ashlight House," Mr. Crow said. He had a voice that could file paper. "Your aunt's estate, such as it is. The will is peculiar but compliant. You inherit the house, its contents, and any remaining trusts. You also inherit its obligations." "Obligations?" Evelyn asked. "The clocks," he said simply, and for the first time his composure frayed. "You must wind them, all of them, every night." Evelyn laughed. Too fast, too bright. She'd flown up from London, to a town that used to be a dot on the map of her childhood, and now felt like a smudge of memory. She was 34, a documentary producer who lived by her inbox, a person who could translate grief into neat episodes. She did not believe in obligations that came with keys. "My aunt died 6 months ago," she said. "Who's been winding them since?" Mr. Crow glanced at the window the way men look at weather. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Vale, on reduced staff." "Reduced to one?" "To one." "And the clocks?" Evelyn asked, because the word had made a private ache near her heart. "They're particular. Your aunt insisted. She said the house forgets itself when the clocks go quiet." He folded his hands, as if to hide their whiteness. "Miss Hart, you may dispose of the property once the inventories are made, but I strongly advise you to spend 1 week in the house, as the will instructs, observing the regimen. After that, sell if you wish. But for the week, keep them wound." "Or what?" She tried to put humor into it, and failed. Mr. Crow's eyes slid off hers. "Night comes early on that ridge. It does things to a house. And time does things to people who think they're outside it." Evelyn pocketed the key. Outside, the town had the polite indifference of a place that had learned to survive tourists and funerals. A carriage clock ticked in the solicitor's hallway. Brave, ordinary sound. She caught its rhythm, held it, and felt calmer. When she turned toward the hill, she saw Ashlight House for the first time since she was 10 years old. A long, pale rectangle shouldered into wind and heath, its central tower rising like a throat. The windows were the color of old teeth. The drive ran straight, without apology, between black yews that veered like ungentlemen. Her aunt, Margaret Hart, had loved 2 things: silence and clocks. The house had taught her both. Evelyn closed her hand around the key. It bit back. She went up. ... Ashlight House was the sort of manor a novelist would invent if they wanted to be accused of indulgence. 3 floors of pale stone and suspicion, roofline bristling with chimneys, a central tower with a widow's walk that needed a better name. The front doors were double, oak gone almost black, the grain like a map of the last century's quarrels. Evelyn lifted the iron knocker. It struck the plate with a sound that made the air taste like pennies. The door opened on the 3rd strike. A woman waited in the hall, as if she had been assembled there. Tall, iron-gray hair, pinned in a geometry that brooked no asymmetry. Her black dress belonged to a decade before Eve was born. Her face was fine-boned, paler than the stone. "Miss Hart?" The woman's voice was dry as a folded letter. "I am Mrs. Vale." "Thank you for—" Evelyn began. "Your aunt hoped you'd come sooner," Mrs. Vale said without reproach, which was somehow worse. "But time isn't a democracy." She turned, and the hall swallowed them. Ashlight's entryway ran the length of the house, a rib cage of beams and shadow. 100 clocks, some alphabetical on consoles, some grandfathers sulking in corners, some brass-faced travelers on narrow shelves, watched like owls. Their ticking was not a noise so much as a weather. The sound gathered and laid itself over Evelyn's wrists, as if to measure her pulse. Evelyn drew breath. "They're beautiful. They're hungry," Mrs. Vale said, "and fussy. If you wind them wrong, they sulk. As you forget, they stop. If they stop—" She let the sentence end like a cliff. Evelyn ran her fingers over a mantel clock's glass as she walked. In its face, she saw herself in the old way, narrow and fox-like, a strand of dark hair refusing sense, the crease between her brows children earn by thinking too much, too early. "I'll keep them wound," she said, "for a week." Mrs. Vale glanced at the windows, high, curtained, convinced of weather. "A week is a decent conversation," she said. "Follow me." They crossed rooms that had been arranged by a mind with a passion for edges. The library smelled like a monastery that had learned to drink. The morning room wore sunlight like an old brooch. In the dining room, a long table sat with its back to a window, sulking like a refused apology. "In the evenings," Mrs. Vale said as they passed, "we keep to the lit rooms. In the tower, one does not linger after dusk. The nursery is closed. The east wing is temperamental." "Temperamental?" "The floors forget themselves," Mrs. Vale said. "They forget where to be floors." Evelyn let out a breath closer to a laugh than a scream. "Does the house also prefer tea before 6? "It prefers accuracy," Mrs. Vale said. "Tea is at 4. She led Evelyn to a room on the second floor overlooking the south lawn. A bed too elegant for sleep, a desk that invited letters, a wardrobe with its own smell of cedar and ghosts. "You'll find your aunt's journals in the writing desk," Mrs. Vale said, "and her rules on the mantel. Dinner at 7. Winding begins at 8. "Every night?" "Every night." When the housekeeper left, the room expanded by half an inch, as if the air dared to rearrange now that the spine had exited. Evelyn set her bag on the bed and opened the writing desk, as if afraid of startling it. Inside, lined in pale leather, lay 7 notebooks and a sheet of paper written in a hand like orchard ladders. Rules for the clocks of Ashlight. Win them after sunset and before midnight. Listen, if a clock resists, leave it. Come back with gentler hands. Never let more than 3 stop at once. If the house grows too quiet, wake the long case in the West Hall. Do not wind the nursery clock. Do not open the east wing doors after 11. If a clock chimes 13, wake the housekeeper and do not go alone. At the bottom, a small personal line. Evelyn, if you read this, I am sorry. Evelyn sat back. The afternoon had the color of old linen. Outside, the heath bent like an animal that knows the whip. She wanted, absurdly, to call her brother Simon and read the rules aloud and make him snort. But Simon had a family and a life that lived at safe distances from houses like this. She took one of the journals. Inside, her aunt's handwriting walked a careful line between precision and confession. June 12. The tower clock has a cough. The boy in the East Hall sits again where he shouldn't. I have set the kitchen clock to run a minute slow. The house likes to race. The nursery was cheerful at noon and wrong by dusk. I took tea with Mr. Crow. His hands shake when he talks about time. June 17th. A new rule. If wind from no window lifts the drapes, check the landing for shoes. The house returns things when the clocks are kind. The page smelled faintly of lavender. Evelyn turned another. August 1st. Winded all 97. Night smooth as a black plate. Dreamed of snow in the corridor. Each flake a minute. Woke to frost on the library latch. 97. Evelyn closed the journal and stood. It was close to 4. Tea, and then perhaps she would walk the house and meet the clocks like citizens. As she reached for the door, the long case on the landing coughed. Not ticked, coughed. It sounded like a man clearing his throat before saying a name. Oh. Evelyn placed her palms flat on the wood to feel if wood could have a pulse. It could. Begin with the West Hall, Mrs. Vale said, handing Evelyn a small ring of keys and a brass crank that looked like a medical instrument. And don't pick a fight with the French one. She hates Londoners. I grew up in Dorset, Evelyn said. Then she'll only hate you a little. They began at 8. Mrs. Vale carried a hurricane lamp and a pencil to mark on a little card she had managed for decades. West Hall, mantel, carriage, regulator, French black slate, Dutch table, West long case, and so on. Evelyn watched and imitated. She learned the weight of the crank in her palm, the exact pressure that prompted a spring to accept its wound without complaint. Some clocks took 7 turns, some 9, some 3 with a sigh. The Dutch one flirted with chime, and then coy, settled. The house listened. When the regulator's pendulum swung, the air in the corridor seemed to breathe on a new beat. The long case in the corner came reluctantly to life. Its first tick was a rusty hinge that soon became certainty. Mrs. Vale spoke softly as they worked. The kitchen likes to be last because it thinks itself important. The tower must be appeased by 9. The study clock stops when men lie. It's stubborn on Tuesdays. What happens if we stop early? Evelyn asked. If we leave half done? The house forgets itself, Mrs. Vale repeated. It becomes all corners and corridors. It goes long where it should be short, and short where it should be long. It coughs. Evelyn adjusted a pendulum bob with 2 careful twists, hearing the tick narrow into clarity. My aunt did this every night? She called it prayer, Mrs. Vale said, so matter-of-fact that Evelyn swallowed any response that had the word superstition in it. She liked to keep the world from slipping. They moved through rooms with names that belonged more to seasons than to function. The parlor, the yellow, the widows, the back morning. Evelyn felt the house learn her hands, accepting or refusing in tiny mechanics. She learned to listen before she touched. Some clocks liked the crank. Others wanted the key. The French black slate one made a disdainful little cluck until she apologized. Then It purred. At 9:15, they climbed the tower. The stairs were stone, the air colder. At the top, a room with windows in all directions, and the central mechanism, the tower clock, its iron bones honest as a skeleton. Its faces outward were blank in the dark. Inward, the gearing ticked like a minimal orchestra. A cord hung from the bell chamber above, braided, worn where many hands had steadied themselves. "Never pull it," Mrs. Vale said, noticing Evelyn's glance. "It isn't a bell rope. It's a reminder." "Of what?" "That the house owes us nothing." They wound the tower with ceremony. As the weights rose, the room felt briefly lighter, as if the whole house had inhaled. On the way down, a window admitted a draft that smelled not like weather. It smelled like apples and candle wax and something older, linen folded for a body. Evelyn froze. "You felt it?" Mrs. Vale said. "The nursery's awake. We haven't—" "We won't," Mrs. Vale said. Rule 5. They finished in the kitchen. The squat wall clock there had a face like an old friend's. When Evelyn coaxed it into ticking, the stove gave a wrong little pop, and the copper pots on the rack sighed like musicians allowed to tune. When the last was wound, Mrs. Vale marked the card as if she had won, and said, "There, hear it?" Evelyn listened. The chorus of 100 clocks aligned into something that was not cacophony. It was a fabric. The house settled on it like a cat on a lap. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked. "We sleep," Mrs. Vale said, "so the house remembers how." But Evelyn did not sleep. She sat at the desk with the journal and listened to the house breathe and tried not to hear the small cough behind the nursery door across the landing. Somewhere near midnight, a clock chimed once, then once again, 3 without sequence. She lifted her head. Silence. Then another cough. The nursery door, which had been very properly shut, now stood a fraction ajar. A line of the most yellow light ran out along the landing like a polite invitation. Evelyn stood before she had decided to. She took the lantern. She crossed the landing soft as a sin. The nursery smelled of soap and secrecy. Dust lay in meek drifts, but the rocking horse in the corner looked like a thing that remembered being ridden yesterday. A row of lead soldiers lined the mantel. On the far wall, a clock shaped like a cottage sat with its hands at 12, its wooden door shut. "Rule 5, Evelyn whispered to the empty room. "Do not wind the nursery clock." But she had not opened the door. Someone had. Under the crib, something small moved. It might have been Mouse, or it might have been a toy that wanted reconsideration. "Hello?" Evelyn said, and never in her life had the word sounded so unhelpful. The rocking horse creaked once, as if adjusting a back. The soldiers saluted. The cottage clock's door opened on its own, with a tiny wooden sigh. A tiny man peered out, carved, ridiculous, painted with courage. He lifted a wooden trumpet and pressed it to his lips. "Don't," Evelyn said. "Too late." He blew. The sound was not wooden. It was a shard of night turned into note. Every clock in the house faltered, a fraction, then raced to catch itself. The tower gave a disgusted little cough. Somewhere below, in the east wing, a door that had been a door for 150 years decided, briefly, to be a mouth. Evelyn shut the nursery door, as gently as shutting becomes a prayer. She leaned her forehead against the painted wood and spoke as if the house could be reasoned with. "I'll keep your rules," she said. "I'll keep them if you do." Somewhere down the hall, a clock chimed 13. She did not wake Mrs. Vale. She watched the hallway with the kind of attention that makes saints. The 13th strike never finished. It hung in the air, like a question no one will answer. At breakfast, Mrs. Vale did not mention the 13th chime. She made porridge and buttered toast with the efficiency of someone who knows that ritual is a sort of shield. Evelyn watched her hands and thought of her aunt's note. "If a clock chimes 13, wake the housekeeper and do not go alone." "Did you hear?" Evelyn began. "I always hear," Mrs. Vale said, pouring tea. "The house tried a mischief. You declined. Well done. The nursery clock exists to tempt, Mrs. Vale." Vale said crisply. "It will insist. It will wheedle. It will oblige. It is the door you do not open." Evelyn nodded, ache behind her eyes like water behind a dam. "What's in the east wing?" Mrs. Vale buttered another slice of toast, as if butter could insulate a house. "Rooms, a gentleman's hobby of hallways, old bedrooms, a conservatory with an attitude problem. The corridor forgets itself after dark. Floors go where they shouldn't, and stairs lead to places they don't. And during the day, it remembers enough to be used," Mrs. Vale said, "if we pay attention." They crossed after 10 with a lantern anyway. Daylight lay across the floorboards like assurance, but the east corridor had a tilt that made the ear feel slanted. Wallpaper, hand-painted vines and moths, peeled from plaster to reveal earlier lives. Mirrors hung at odd heights. Someone had arranged a dozen chairs along the wall facing nothing. Audience seating for a play that had never been performed. "Why so many mirrors?" Evelyn asked. "Your aunt liked to check what was behind her without turning," Mrs. Vale said. They passed a small parlor where a chessboard waited with a single move to mate. Mrs. Vale touched the queen lightly, then didn't move it back. In the next room, a music stand held open a score to a page where the ink had bled, as if a note had wept. At the far end, the conservatory, glass-ribbed and fog-breathed. Plants slept in winter's grammar. The door onto the terrace did not quite meet its frame. Beyond, the estate fell away into edges, wood, heath, a line of dark pines. In that band of trees, something pale moved and did not. Evelyn lifted the latch to test the door. It opened easily, which made nothing better. Cold came in with a low, disinterested voice. "We close this at dusk," Mrs. Vale said. "What happens if we don't?" "The garden comes in," Mrs. Vale said. As they turned to go, Evelyn noticed a long case clock near the conservatory door. Narrow, undecorated, its face plain as bread. It had no hands. The glass was smoky, as if it had been breathed upon for 100 years. "What's that one?" she asked. Mrs. Vale's mouth went thin. "The house's favorite. It tells time the way a hunter tells jokes. Never wind it, never touch it, never look at it too long." Evelyn looked away. On their way back, the corridor had grown a kink it had not had. They stood in front of 3 doors where there had been 2. Mrs. Vale did not swear, which made the swear audible anyway. The east wing forgets, she said through her teeth. Stand still. Count back. Say what you see. Evelyn closed her eyes. She found the rhythm of the houses ticking the way a musician finds a band in a loud room. She set it in her ribs. When she opened her eyes, the right-hand door had gone. The middle door was now a staircase. The left was still the left. This way, Mrs. Vale said. Don't blink. They stepped through the correct wrongness and re-entered the hall where it should be. Evelyn swallowed once and found the taste of iron. Will it get worse? She asked. Depends on the clocks, Mrs. Vale said. And on you. Me? The house minds you, Mrs. Vale said, as if complaining. You're the sort it minds. What sort is that? The sort that whines careful and asks forgiveness after questions, Mrs. Vale said. The sort that believes rules are for keeping people alive and not for making children obedient. Evelyn did not answer. She felt heat behind her eyes again and disapproved of herself for it. They returned to the safe rooms. At noon, Mr. Crow called to ask about inventories and whether the East silver had been counted. Evelyn said the house had mislaid a corridor and she would call him back. He said, after a silence in which both made faces they wouldn't show, very good. At 4, tea. At 7, dinner. At 8, the winding. They were halfway through the yellow parlor when the house performed a new trick. The clocks did not stop. They began to agree. Tick by tick, the 100 small sovereigns surrendered their eccentricities. The sound became one sound, too even, too smooth. The pendulums swung together on a beat impossible to maintain without a conductor. Mrs. Vale, Evelyn whispered. The house is counting, Mrs. Vale said. We'll be quick. They wound faster. Hands practiced. Apologies murmured to fussy ones. Bribes offered in the form of clean glass and a steady breath. The tower weights rose. The kitchen became haughty. The nursery door remained properly shut. Then 13 again. A single, unmistakable tone from the landing long case. On its face, the minute hand stuttered, then leapt, then fell back, a fish in air. Don't, Mrs. Vale began. Evelyn had already stepped into the hall. The long case stood with the solemnity of a confessional. She ran east through a corridor that grew new corners under her feet. The house tried to make wrong turns look likable. Doors offered rooms she had wanted when she was 12. The smell of summer cake rolled up from the kitchen in December. She ignored all of it and followed the edge of cold air that knows its own. The conservatory door stood open to the winter terrace. Beyond the threshold, fog had arranged itself like an audience. Frost moved over the old quarry tiles in a way frost doesn't. Purposeful, spiraling, elegant. Plants that had no business being green in January had pushed worrisome shoots between the floorboards. Mrs. Vale, Evelyn called, and the name's echo came back as if someone else had tried it first. She stepped inside and the temperature dropped like a purse from a pocket. Her breath hung in the air, an unconvincing ghost. The handless long case stood where it had stood. But now, its smoky glass cleared, and behind it, where gears should be, was a small black garden. Moss on stones, a tree no larger than a man's arm with white flowers that pulsed in a rhythm that had nothing to do with heart. Something moved in that garden. A child. A boy wearing a sailor suit that no one had bought in 100 years. Bare feet, pale and perfect. He looked up, and his eyes were coins of dark. "Hello," he said politely. Evelyn's mouth found honesty. "Absolutely not." He smiled, the timeless smile of children who have never been told no. "You opened the door." "I did not." "You did," he said with kindness. "I pushed." Mrs. Vale arrived at a trot that treated age as a detail. She took one look at the handless clock and sketched a sign in the air that might have been a prayer or a map. "Get back," she told Evelyn. "Don't look at his hands." "What?" "They'll be yours," Mrs. Vale said sharply. The boy slid one foot over the threshold of the clock's glass. Where it met air, the air bowed. "I'm meant to be in the nursery," he said with a sigh. "But no one winds my clock. The garden is nicer." "Back, Mrs. Vale," Vale said, and for the first time, Evelyn heard authority at a pitch that could stop a cat mid-pounce. The boy blinked, considered, and stepped back into the small, impossible garden. White flowers closed politely. "Close the conservatory door," Mrs. Vale said, without turning. Evelyn did. The frost on the tiles withdrew with the offended dignity of a gentleman leaving a bad party. The fog outside huffed and sank, a sheet shaken and folded. The temperature resumed. The handless clock's glass re-smoked. The boy became shadow, shaped like memory. The white flowers did not pulse. They were glass again. Evelyn realized her hands were shaking. She opened and closed them until they could hold. Mrs. Vale let out a breath she had held for a century. "He dislikes rules." "So do I," Evelyn said, "because panic and confession live next door." Mrs. Vale's mouth twitched. "You're in excellent company." They stood in the conservatory a long minute, letting their pulses persuade the house to calm. "Mrs. Vale," Evelyn said at last, "what happens if I leave? If I sell the house? If we stop winding the clocks?" Mrs. Vale looked at her as if measuring how much truth a ribcage could survive. "Some houses die like animals, loud, messy, with protest. Ashlight would not die. It would go everywhere. It would put its rooms in other houses and its stairs in other towns. It would let its nursery find children in cities. It would hide its garden in the backs of people's eyes. It would become a quiet that sounds like ticking. And people would say, 'How odd,' and keep going." Evelyn steadied herself on the conservatory table. "So we keep it together?" "For a week," Mrs. Vale said. "And then, if you must, give it to men with cranes and hammers and let them forget it the good hard way. But not before we finish the week. For your aunt's sake, for the clocks, for the boy." "Who is he?" Evelyn asked, because questions are the only way some people know to love. Mrs. Vale's features smoothed into neutrality. "A ledger entry," she said. "A house's memory of a son who wasn't." They finished the winding late. The house settled, prickly and pleased. Evelyn went back to her room and found, on the desk, a Polaroid she had not taken, the nursery door closed, and the small wooden trumpeter sitting politely on the floor, his trumpet by his side. On the back, in her aunt's orchard ladder hand, "If you get this, you're doing it properly. Don't let the garden in. Don't let the boy out. And for God's sake, If the east wing laughs, run. Somewhere below, across timber and regret, a single clock chimed once. It sounded like a breath. Evelyn woke before dawn, not because she wanted to, but because the house wanted her to. It was the kind of waking that starts in the spine, a soft electric nudge that pulls you upright before your mind has caught up. The room was cold enough for breath to bloom white. The clocks were ticking, but something was wrong. The sound wasn't scattered and natural. It was synchronized again. Every single clock ticked at the exact same pace, like soldiers marching in formation. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was too perfect to be human. She threw on her robe and crossed to the writing desk. Another journal lay open, one she didn't remember leaving there. It wasn't one of her aunt's. The pages were newer, the handwriting jagged and rushed, not Margaret Hart's precise loops. And more disturbing, the first entry was dated 3 days from now. 5th night. The house is listening. The east wing is awake. Vale says not to open the mirror room, but it's already too late. I saw my own reflection step out of the glass. It spoke in my voice. It knew things I hadn't said aloud. It told me the clocks aren't keeping time, they're keeping them in. Evelyn's heart thudded. She flipped the page. 6th night. The journal is filling itself. It writes when I'm asleep. It knows when I hesitate. It warns me. 13 chimes isn't a mistake. It's a doorbell. The remaining pages were blank, but faintly, under the paper, impressions of words were etched, as if a heavy hand had written, and then the ink had been swallowed. She closed the journal and stared at the wall clock above the desk. 4:17 a.m. It hadn't been wound. It shouldn't be ticking. But it was, and not on time. Its second hand spun freely, round and round like a wheel set loose. The house, she realized, wasn't marking time. It was rehearsing something. The day passed in brittle silence. Mrs. Vale said little beyond practicalities. Tea, winding, the weather. Evelyn read more journals, each stranger than the last. Some were written in her aunt's hand, others in unfamiliar ones. One entry, from 1953, spoke of a boy who never aged, but always appeared when the nursery clock ran backwards. Another, unsigned, described a 13th chime that led to a hallway lined with doors that opened into the same room over and over. At dusk, the wind rose. Clouds hung low over the moor. The house groaned like a ship at sea. Evelyn wound the clocks with steady hands, refusing to meet their glassy faces. At 11, the east wing laughed. It started as a creak, floorboards settling, beams expanding. Then it became unmistakable, a long, low chuckle, resonant and alive, echoing through the hallway. Mrs. Vale went white. It's too soon. What is? Evelyn whispered. The 13th name. The laughter grew louder, joined by whispers sliding under the doors. The wallpaper seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting with a heartbeat. A gust of cold air swept through the hall, snuffing out 2 lanterns. The long case clock struck midnight. Once, twice, 12 times. Then a pause, and then a slow, deliberate 13th chime. The east wing doors swung open on their own. Mrs. Vale grabbed Evelyn's wrist. Don't go in. Not yet. But Evelyn's body moved without her consent. Something in the sound, the low, beckoning tone of the 13th bell, drew her forward. The hall stretched ahead like a throat. The mirrors on the walls reflected not her, but dozens of versions of herself, older, younger, thinner, tired, each whispering her name in a voice that was almost hers, but not quite. Evelyn, Evelyn. At the corridor's end stood a single door. It was old, older than the house itself. Its frame was carved with names in dozens of hands. Most were unreadable, weathered down to suggestion. But one stood out, freshly carved, deep and deliberate. Evelyn Hart. Her breath caught. "I didn't write that." "No," said a voice beside her. But when she turned, Mrs. Vale was gone. In her place stood a woman in a dark dress, her face eerily familiar. She was Evelyn, or almost. "You already did," the reflection said, and smiled. "And you will again." The door creaked open. Inside, the room was impossible. Its ceiling stretched too high, its corners too far. The clocks here weren't ticking. They were breathing. They swelled and contracted like lungs, their hands twitching in arrhythmic spasms. In the center of the room stood a massive clock tower mechanism, gears the size of doors, pendulums swinging like executioners' axes, and trapped within its cage of brass and steel were people. Some were transparent like ghosts, others solid and terrified. Some whispered to themselves, some stared blankly into nothing. Evelyn's aunt was among them, pale, older than she remembered, but alive. "Evelyn," she rasped, "it's too late. The clocks don't mark time. They eat it." Her reflection circled her like a vulture. "The house doesn't forget," it whispered. "It keeps everything. Every second, every life, every mistake. It keeps you." The cage's gears turned. Evelyn felt the seconds around her slowing, stretching, becoming heavy. Her heart beat once every eternity. The air itself became syrup. "Wind them," the reflection whispered. "Keep them alive, or stop them, and let time stop with them." The clocks groaned. The floor beneath her feet shifted. The east wing was moving, folding inward, like a book closing on its last page. Time thickened until Evelyn thought her veins would clot with it. The gears creaked, each movement a roar. The pendulum swung in grotesque slow motion. Around her, the trapped souls, hundreds of them, murmured prayers, apologies, and fragments of memory. Each tick was a heartbeat, each talk a stolen year. Her Aunt Margaret's eyes locked onto hers, desperate and lucid. "Listen to me, Evelyn," she said. "The house feeds. It needs seconds, the scraps of our lives. That's why we wind the clocks. They take time from us, not just keep it. And if they stop, they devour," finished a voice behind her. Evelyn turned. The boy from the nursery stood there, older now, or perhaps she was younger. Time played tricks here. He held a pendulum chain in his small skeletal hand. "Time is a debt," he said. "The house lent it to you the moment you were born. Now it wants repayment." "And if I refuse?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling but steady. "Then everything you are, every heartbeat, every breath returns here, back into the clocks, back into the house, and you'll never leave. The boy tilted his head. But there's a choice. You can pay the debt with your life or someone else's. The implication cut deep. Evelyn looked toward her aunt, toward Mrs. Vale, who stood in the doorway, silently watching, and felt the weight of the decision press into her bones. Margaret shook her head fiercely. No, don't bargain with it. Don't become it. The boy smiled with something that wasn't kindness. It's too late. You're already part of the clockwork. The boy led her deeper into the chamber, where a colossal clock, the size of a cathedral wall, loomed over them. It had no face, no hands, no chimes. Only a single dark pendulum swung back and forth, cutting through reality like a blade. Each swing distorted the room, bending the walls, stretching the floor. "This is the heart of Ashlight," said the boy. "It does not tell time. It is time." Evelyn stared into the black pendulum, and for a moment she saw everything. Every second she had ever lived. Her first steps, her mother's funeral, the night she fell in love, the morning she walked away. All of it looping and repeating, over and over, like gears in a machine. "It keeps us all," the boy whispered, "until the last second." And then she saw something else. A vision of herself, older, still trapped inside Ashlight House decades from now. Winding clocks, talking to ghosts, waiting for a visitor who never came. A prisoner not of chains, but of minutes. "No," she hissed, "that's not my life." "It already is," the boy said. But Evelyn felt something stir, a spark of rebellion. Maybe it was her aunt's courage, or her mother's stubbornness, or just the exhaustion of a lifetime spent running from grief. Whatever it was, she stepped forward and grabbed the pendulum chain with both hands. The chamber screamed. Time screamed. "Stop fighting!" the boy shouted. "You'll tear the house apart!" "Good," Evelyn snarled. "Let it break." The pendulum jerked, faltered, and finally stopped. The silence that followed was immense. Every clock in Ashlight House went still. Every breath hung suspended. The walls rippled like disturbed water. Evelyn felt time itself hold its breath. Then the house began to remember. Rooms that had never existed unfolded. Forgotten hallways reappeared. Portraits whispered names that had been erased from history. Ghosts blinked awake from centuries of slumber. The house wasn't dying. It was rewinding. Mrs. Vale stumbled into the chamber, her face pale. "Evelyn, what have you done?" "I stopped it," Evelyn said. "You can't stop time," Vale whispered. "You can only unmake it." The boy screamed, and his scream shattered into hundreds of voices, all the souls trapped inside the clockwork. They poured out, swirling like a storm, flooding the house, escaping through every crack and crevice. Evelyn felt their hands brush past her, their gratitude and rage alike. Her aunt's voice was among them. "Run, Evelyn. The house is remembering how it began." The walls split open. Gears burst like organs. Clocks crashed to the floor, their faces shattering. The air shimmered, not hot, but ancient. And then everything went white. When Evelyn woke, she was lying on the grass outside Ashlight House. The sun was rising over the moor. Birds sang. Wind rolled through the heather. The house stood behind her, or rather, what was left of it. Most of the walls had crumbled. The tower had collapsed inward. The great clock had fallen silent. It was no longer a home, nor a prison. It was just a ruin. Mrs. Vale stood beside her, clutching a broken clock hand like a relic. She looked older, impossibly older. "It's done," she said. She said softly, "It's finally done." "Is it?" Evelyn whispered. Vale shook her head. "Time doesn't die. It just moves on." They walked away together, leaving the ruin to the wind. As they reached the edge of the property, Evelyn felt something in her pocket. Cold, familiar. She reached in and pulled out the iron key Mr. Crow had given her days ago. Only now, the teeth were worn smooth, blunt, useless. And as she dropped it into the dirt, she swore she heard far behind her a single, final tick. Then, silence. A year later, a new family purchased the land where Ashlight House had once stood. They built a modest cottage, small, modern, efficient. On their first night, they noticed a faint ticking coming from beneath the floorboards. It was nothing, they said, just the pipes, just the wind. But at midnight, something chimed 13 times.